text today comes from the Gospel of Mark, chapter 1. Now, obviously, you're going to need to open your Bibles or open the Bibles that are in your pews to follow along with us. Today we're going to be talking, and this interesting how this sermon came up. We've been following along in Mark, so this has just been a natural progression, but it seems to tie in very well with our current situation. As you're in the process of looking for an interim pastor, and the search committee is beginning to put together things that will be able to look for a permanent pastor. So it's an exciting time. And today our sermon is entitled The Pastor's Priorities. All right, Mark chapter 1, beginning at verse 29. As soon as they left the synagogue, they went with James and John to the home of Simon and Andrew. Simon's mother-in-law was in bed with a fever, and they immediately told Jesus about her. So he went to her, took her hand, and helped her up. The fever left her, and she began to wait on them. That evening, after sunset, the people brought to Jesus all the sick and demon-possessed. The whole town gathered at the door, and Jesus healed many who had various diseases. He also drove out many demons, but he would not let the demons speak because they knew who he was. Remember last week's message. Verse 35, very early in the morning, while it was still dark, Jesus got up, left the house, and went off to a solitary place where he prayed. Simon and his companions went to look for him, and when they found him, they exclaimed, "Everyone is looking for you." Jesus replied, "Let us go somewhere else, to the nearby villages, so I can preach there also. That is why I have come." So he traveled throughout Galilee, preaching in their synagogues and driving out demons. All right, again, the who, what's, and where, what the facts of the text. First of all, who are we talking about? Well, Jesus, and at this point, he has 4 of his disciples that were at the synagogue in Capernaum. And you can see on the map above where Capernaum is. Remember, it's in the southwest corner of the Sea of Galilee. And they had been there. Jesus had been teaching, and remember, he had the encounter with the demon-possessed man and such. But Jesus went there to teach. And the when is this happened. This occasion happened just after they had left the tabernacle in Capernaum. Now, the what? Well, Jesus and the disciples went to Peter's house. Simon's house and Andrew's house, and Peter's mother-in-law was sick, and so Jesus reached down, took her hand, and helped her up, and she was healed. Now, it doesn't say necessarily what happened next, but you kind of get the idea that some of the people that may have been in the house, they went out. They were just amazed at the fact that this lady had been healed. And so they went out and they told everybody in town. And so it says that all of these people, the whole town, came to the house so that Jesus could heal them. The whole town, anyone who was sick, anyone who was demon-possessed, they brought to this house so that Jesus could heal them, so Jesus could cast the demons out. I said that's what he did until nightfall. And I can only imagine that he probably had to finally say, okay, that's enough. The rest of you have to go home. So he had to shut the door so he could get some rest. As we see early the next morning, Jesus got up, and as would be his custom, he went out and in the darkness, went to a quiet place, and there he had his time alone with God. Time of meditation, time of peace and quiet, a time of devotion. The others eventually got out of bed, and People were outside the house again, looking for Jesus, looking to be healed. So Peter went out to find him. And when he finally found him, it's like he was, almost, you could almost say, Jesus, what are you doing? What are you doing? You got all of these people back at our house that need to be healed. Come on, let's go. Can we cut off the prayers a little early? Can we start, healing? Can we open the office a little earlier so that we can heal all of these people? Come on, there's so many people there. And what does Jesus say? Let's go somewhere else. Let's go somewhere else. Now, these people had legitimate needs. These people had, we assume, legitimate problems. These were people in trouble. These were people who had needs. And Jesus said, no, let's go somewhere else. So that I can, because I didn't come just to heal, but I came to teach. I came to preach. So let's go somewhere else so that we can accomplish what I have come to do. Imagine you've had a very stressful year. Anybody? Stressful year. And you finally have an opportunity for a vacation. And so you get away and you go someplace for a week. You can't really relax in a week, maybe 2 weeks. You've gone away for 2 weeks. Wonderful, wonderful. And then you come back on a Sunday. You want to take advantage of all the time. Come back on Sunday and get ready for work the next day. You decide, well, I'm going to go in a little early. I'll go in 15 minutes early and kind of, plant myself in my chair again and get kind of, make sure the adjustments are all right and kind of get ready for the day and to see what's happening. And you get back to your desk, and your desk is yellow, covered with Post-it notes. And every one of these messages is either marked urgent or urgent with an underline or several underlines, critical, whatever. And so you sit yourself down and automatically you say, oh my goodness. And so you start. You say, well, I'm going to need to work through lunch today. I'll probably have to work late today. And so you get right back into it. Has that ever happened to any of you? And you wonder, why did I leave? Would it have been just better for me to have stayed at the office and taken care of this stuff rather than to now come back and to face all of it? Well, today's text, I can see two different messages in here. And again, we're talking this morning about a pastor's priorities. Now, when a pastor comes, or any, a new person at work or whatever, everyone has a set of priorities. Okay? A pastor is going to come, whether it's an interim pastor or the full-time pastor, he's going to come and he's going to have his own set of priorities. Now, his set of priorities and your set of expectations for his priorities may not be the same. May not be the same, okay? So let me give you two encouragements. And this is, and believe me, I'm preaching it myself, so because there's some of these things I haven't done very well with. The first thing that we need to do is that we need to check our priorities. as a pastor coming in, I need to check my priorities. And you as a congregation needs to, to check and see if, what your expectations are. We all go into jobs, or we all go into hobbies, or we all go into anything with a set of boundaries that we expect to stay within. I know of people that will, they like the casinos. Okay, so they'll go to a casino, but they're going to always say, we're only going to spend $50. I have $50, so that's what we're going to spend. Well, that's fine. The $50 goes, and so you leave, right? No, you go to the ATM. Okay, you go to the ATM and get more money out, just another 50, because again, we have boundaries. But we've given that up. When it comes to the pastor, a pastor is going to, as he talks to his congregation, he's going to talk to them about priorities. And you all know these priorities. The first priority is God, our allegiance to God. The second that we would say would be the importance, our allegiance to our families, okay, right? And thirdly, we would say our allegiance to the church. Now, the church is sometimes changed for work. Okay, but that's another sermon that we're not going to talk about today. So let's just say we have those three priorities of God, a relationship with God, our relationship with our family, and then finally our relationship to the church. For a pastor, however, the church, though they may believe that for their lives, for the pastor, they sometimes juggle numbers 2 and 3. Okay, they sometimes will feel that the pastor should have God as number 1, but number 2 should be the church, and then number 3 should be the family. All right, so I'm, as a congregation, do you feel that's all right? Does that make sense? Does that make sense? I had a colleague who, a very devoted man of God. It's all I can say. And since his time in seminary, he had made it a practice that every day between 8 and 9, okay, 8 o'clock and 9 o'clock in the morning, he would have his quiet time with God. Now, he had it, sometimes it would be at his house in his study, sometimes it would be at church, at his office, or wherever, but this was the time that he spent alone with God. And when he went to the new church, he let everybody know. When he candidated and after he had been accepted, he put it as a regular part of his schedule. From 8 to 9, I'm not available. This is my time alone with God. Remember, because God is what? Number 1. Okay. Well, there was one gentleman that people feel that when they're in their cars, they need to talk on the phone. Okay? You get in the car and you get your phone, and you just, because you see it as dead time. And so you pick up your phone and you talk. Well, there was a gentleman in the church, he would be on his way to work, so it would usually be about 8:30 in the morning. And so guess who he decides to call? The pastor. Why not? The pastor's at work. He should be at work. It's 8:30. I'm on my way to work. Everybody should be at work. So he calls the pastor. Well, guess what? The pastor doesn't answer. I mean, this was a member of the board, and the pastor doesn't answer his phone. And he brought that up. He brought that up in a meeting. I call and the pastor never answers his phone. When do you call? 8:30 in the morning. You know, this guy felt that his conversation with this pastor was more important than the pastor's conversation with God. What about the pastor who refused to answer his cell phone during his daughter's birthday party? That's what you have cell phones for, to answer. To answer. Or what about the pastor that was expected? Now, you know, it wasn't necessarily said, but he was expected to come back early from a vacation so that he could preside at the funeral of one of the members. What do you think about that? You know, I had one of our pastors here in Wyandotte was in Florida for a vacation. A member of the church died. They insisted that he fly up to do the service and then fly back down. You know, I mean, what's that about? What's that about? What do you think the family felt during that time? How do you think the family felt about that? You know, how about the daughter whose birthday party it was? And what if the pastor had picked up the phone and sometimes you get into these long conversations with somebody? What do you think the daughter, how do you think she felt? And of course we say, oh honey, that's just daddy's job. What value have we given her? What value have you given her? So I would ask that take a look and consider and talk to the pastor about what you feel his priorities should be, and see how those line up with Jesus' answer. You know, Jesus, there were people Jesus could have healed, and he didn't. He left and he went someplace else. Why? Because of his priorities. He hadn't come just to heal, but he come to preach and come to teach. Second message that I see in this text is that as a pastor, I again didn't do this, but I have to realize, a pastor has to realize that he can't do everything. A pastor has to realize that he can't do everything, and the congregation needs to make sure that they understand that the pastor can't do everything, and they shouldn't expect him to do everything. There's some things that you're calling, you're going to be calling a pastor. You need to determine what it is that you want him to do. You know, specifically, what is it that you want him to do? Because sometimes and as a pastor coming in, unless, you know, he's a real, hard-head person, he's probably going to try to do whatever it is that you ask him to do. Now, he may have his own set of boundaries and set of limits, but because he's new here and he wants to, try to build some bridges and so forth, he's going to want to probably do whatever it is that he can do. Well, eventually, you know what happens? Eventually, as you continue to ask him to do more and more and more things, suddenly he's outside of the realm of what it is that he was called to do. Suddenly, you have him, sweeping the floors. Suddenly you have him doing all kinds of other things, and that's not what he was called to do. Pastors sometimes are a little, I don't want to say fragile, but we are. We are typically pleasers. We want to try to please everyone. We want the pat on the back. Say, nice job, good job, glad you did that. We don't want people to think that we're not working enough. Now we all kind of have that problem because we don't have necessarily 9-to-5 jobs. And so where other people do, and so we try to make up for that by working whatever, going in, sometime early in the morning, staying late, working at home, whatever it is. We just don't want people to feel that we're not working hard enough. And then if there are difficulties, if things aren't working well, then, well, let's start another service. Let's have a new service. Well, who's going to be in charge of that new service? The pastor. I mean, if you want a new service, if you want a new program, if you want, where's that going to fall? It's going to fall on the pastor. And maybe that's not what is really needed. And yet the pastor is trying to do all of these things, trying to stay current on, reading books day in and day out, trying to find the newest things that are working in churches. Because that's kind of the expectation that folks have. But folks, it isn't possible. In real life, it's difficult. It's probably difficult for all of us because many of us, unless you're just a super executive, a lot of us have a hard time delegating because we're not sure that who we're delegating to is going to do the same job that we would do. Sometimes in delegating, it creates more work than I'll just do it myself. Rather than teach someone else how to do it, I'll just do it myself. I think most pastors want, to be involved. They want to do whatever they can for their members. But eventually, if you don't set some boundaries, it's going to wear you down. It's going to wear the pastor down. We live in an area in which, we have hospitals from South Shore to Henry Ford, Detroit, and on beyond. How many of those hospitals can you hit in a day? What's expected from the congregation? How many couples can you counsel? How many Bible studies can you lead? How many cutting-edge books can you read? How much of that can you do? Folks, I hope that you'll understand that your pastor can't do it all, whoever it is. Can't do it all. So that means that if something needs to be done, then somebody else is going to have to do it. If your interim pastor is not available on Wednesday nights, come fall, what's going to happen? What's going to happen? Somebody's going to have to step up if we're going to have a Wednesday night Bible study or prayer meeting. And we have a Bible study already going, but if you want something else, somebody is going to have to step up. and take care of it. I hope you'll consider, as you're bringing somebody in, I hope you'll consider what can I do? What can I do to make this not just a transition, but what can I do to make this person's ministry a valuable one and one that is going to be beneficial to this church, to this congregation? Don't put it all on him, because it's not fair and it's not biblical.